Right, we'll probably get started in a minute. If unless everybody has any questions to begin with, or essentially today, the main purpose is to talk around the spring budget changes that were proposed. We were hoping, if I'm honest, for a lot more information around some of these points. We've got a little bit of information in some areas, and it's sort of probably to the purpose of today, probably just quite a high level. Understanding what changes are planned, what to be aware of, and how it's going to impact your business, really, and how the sort of the future is going to look from the purposes of sponsor licenses and managing people under that. Because I think there's a sort of a few changes that are imminent, and also if you're part of a big intercompany group, I think it should be quite positive. But on the whole, we're sort of still very much got a high level understanding of some of the changes that are coming in. Any questions, any queries, just please feel free to put them in the chat box, or raise any questions with me during the seminar. So moving on to the first slide. So the budget was delivered in the 15th of March 2023, and there was 4 sort of main pillars to the budget that were brought out. So the Chancellor focused on these 4 pillars: and the employment boosting labour supply to ensure that the economy is well supported to boost growth and improve living standards; education, providing the public with skills and support needed; enterprise, providing the right conditions for businesses to succeed; and ensuring the benefits of economic growth are felt across the UK. So the reason this has come about is because obviously we're seeing this day to day. There's a huge labour shortage within a number of sectors. I think the government has been quite slow to react to this. For example, the driver crisis that you've seen, the problems you had with bringing chefs in following Brexit, and so the government is trying to be a bit more reactive to it. However, I think for certain other reasons, we've seen they've been quite slow to react in some situations, particularly with regard to bringing in foreign workers, because of the political stance and some of the political issues around migration. But ultimately, this was what was announced, and there was sort of hoping for a few sort of significant changes being brought in. So this is probably quite similar to some of the things I spoke about when we did the roadshow. So I'm not going to go into this into a lot of detail, but this is really the setting of the scene, which is, well, why are we in this position? Well, we're currently got over 1 million jobs, vacancies, huge, really low unemployment rates, and 78% of employers saying they're struggling to recruit, particularly in certain sectors. So pharmacists, care, huge issues, engineering. And therefore, in certain situations, people are looking at sponsor licenses and skilled worker routes to bring workers in. Others are looking to bring people in from maybe abroad, if they're part of an international business, to bring skills in either temporarily or permanent. That's quite a complicated and can be quite an expensive route to look at. And some of this is, and this is again why some of these changes are being proposed. I think there's huge complexity around certain visa routes. And there's a lot of confusion around it. So before sort of moving forward, if you want to bring somebody in for a long-term basis, so 3 to 5 years, you're normally looking at a skilled worker route. Okay, so you need a sponsor license and to make the skilled worker application. If you're looking to move somebody between, say, your Belgium office to your UK office, you really need the more normal one, and it's only for maybe a 6 or 12-month period, is a global mobility route, and there's various different routes within that. But you need a sponsor license to do that, and then you're looking at maybe specialist or skilled worker visa. Okay. However, if you're coming in to work maybe for a week or a month on a specific project, then, as we'll talk about later, you need a visitor visa. Okay, because you can't just come in and work. There are only very limited grounds where you can come in and work under a certain visitor visa. So, apologies, not a visitor visa. You can come in as a visitor, but there's very limited grounds you can work. If you're coming in to actually work and do some for a week, then you'll need to fit one and tick one of those boxes, a skilled worker or global mobility route, which is where this confusion comes. Because previously under Brexit, people could cross over the borders from, say, Belgium or Holland and work without restriction. And I don't think people have necessarily caught up with this. So why are we in this position? Well, obviously Brexit, there's no longer free movement across borders, which has meant a lot of people returning home to their original countries. Talent shortages, criticism around schools and education to say that people aren't being trained and skilled in the same ways, so therefore we're not addressing those issues. And also a change in worker habits. Generation Z are looking at other working environments. They're no longer drawn towards more mundane, boring professions. They look, the sort of general consensus is that they're looking for roles where they can become more skilled, more varied, more flexible, and they're turning away from certain professions because of the sort of high stress or high levels of sort of low job satisfaction based on the fact it can be quite monotonous. So moving forward, so how does the budget help? What's the budget proposing to do? So the idea behind the budget is that it's trying to, obviously what we saw initially was there was a lot of talk around trying to get staff that retired during the pandemic to return, okay, trying to encourage older workers to come back into work and making the benefit of that loss of skills from the economy. They're also looking at access to talent from abroad. So how the government proposed to do this. So what they've proposed to do is they've commissioned the Migration Advisory Committee to assess the shortage of occupation list. I'll go on to a little bit more detail as to what is the Migration Advisory Committee in a minute. But ultimately, the assessment of shortage of occupation list is roles within the UK where there is a shortage. This obviously says what it's pretty clear, but also that the government will permit in as well. So there is a political stance to it as well as to which jobs go into that list. And then streamlining business visitor policies. So that is coming back before about what is the permitted activities, which is really complicated, which it's much easier to explain with those up. So developing on this is, so what is the Migration Advisory Committee? So the government commissioned the Migrant Advisory Committee to assess shortage of occupation list. What that is ultimately it's a list of, it's a committee that assesses where the government currently needs to bring workers in. So it's an independent, non-government body. What they've done in the past is in December 2021, they proposed to the government that care workers, care assistants, and care workers were home care workers were added to the shortage of occupation list. That's the last time it was updated. I think the actual full list was updated in 2020, but this was a recommendation that was made to the government that they implemented. So you can see it's not moved particularly quickly, and you can see how the economic climate has changed massively over the last sort of 2 years really, and the fact it hasn't been updated that period is one of the criticisms. So what they're trying to do is the committee is going to produce an annual report looking at migration figures, looking at the work undertaken over the preceding year, and is going to make recommendations. The slight irritation with this is the government doesn't have to follow the advice of the committee, which makes it a little bit toothless. But I think the reason for that is there can be political connotations with some of the decision that's been made. So then looking at, well, what is the shortage of occupation list? So the shortage of occupation list details the roles, as I said before, where there is a shortage of suitable labour within the economy. And it has a secondary string, which is, and where it is sensible to hire migrant workers under the skilled worker visa route. So skilled worker visa route is usually at a degree level, and it's for those roles in shortage of supply. So as I said before, they're looking to update that and keep that updated. The advantages of bringing somebody in the shortage or occupation list as opposed to a skilled worker who's not in the shortage or occupation list is there's a lower salary threshold. So it's about 20% less if they're on the shortage or occupation list. That means that it's going from a threshold of maybe 26,200, which is to 20,960 pounds. So it's a significant drop, which is making it far more affordable. Reducing visa fees, so you're looking at reduction from around £625 or up to £1,423, depending on the duration of the visa, to about 479. So again, it's a 25% saving on that. And then what it also allows is supplemental work. So normally under the terms of your visa, if you have a skilled worker in, it says you can come in and work for your sponsor for the job that's detailed within your visa. However, it does permit, if you're in short of occupation work, to work up to 20 hours or can actually be unlimited depending on when you've come in. It is changing in the same role, provided it's in the shortage of occupation list. So for example, a carer could come in and work for you and go off and do supplemental work for another care company, which is something that's come up quite a lot recently. So I'm just going back to mixed up my two slides. So just checking I haven't missed anything of interest. The other thing, which I'll touch upon it when we come to the permitted visa routes. So what are the changes that are coming in? So as you'll see from the announcement that was made during the budget, they've added 5 roles to the shortage of occupation list. So bricklayers and masons, roof tilers, slaters, carpenters, all self-explanatory there. And they've added those in. Those previously weren't on the list. The problem with this is that we're going to take a while to actually see how long it's going to take us to actually drip down into the economy and make an impact. And also understanding, well, actually, is this going to help? My slight risk, we haven't come across a huge amount of companies in the construction. We've got 1 or 2 in the construction industry dealing with this, but I suppose my slight issue is if you're looking at these sort of routes, you've obviously got your management as a sponsor. If you bring somebody as a skilled worker, you've obviously got your duties as a spot under the sponsor license to update the SMS system whilst they're in country. If you've got a bricklayer, mason, roofer, etc., they tend to work on multi-sites. So I think one of the things you'd have to think about if you're looking at this route to bring people in and these particular occupation codes is how are you going to monitor whether they turn up for work? Obviously, you've got to, if they don't turn up to work after 10 days, you have to notify them on the SMS system to ensure that they're aware of what's happening with the migrant worker. But obviously you need to ensure you've got some form of mechanism to check the turning up, because the last thing you want to do is maybe go a month without being identified because you haven't had the sufficient reporting in place. So I think from a compliance perspective, just have a think about that because of the nature of the work. They don't tend to be working on one site and easy to assess and check. Obstacles that are still in place in relation to this is skilled worker routes. You're still required to have the English language requirement. So that can be a problem, or has been a bit of a problem with the sort of construction company construction company we've been working with, is that a lot of the workers they're bringing in from Romania and Poland don't have sufficient English language qualification, which means that the skilled worker route isn't a route they're able to take advantage of. So therefore, we're having to look at other options, which has been making it quite complicated. Obviously, still in place, if you're looking at this route, is the immigration skill charge, which is a significant fee. The frustration with that, from our perspective, and there's a lot of lobbying around trying to remove this, is it's a tax. There's no reason for this. It's just basically a levy that's placed on people bringing workers from abroad. So the hope is that they will start to maybe look to reduce that, or maybe look to remove it for certain fields, particularly where there's a particular shortage. The thing is, it still makes it expensive. So hopefully we'll see a bit of change here, but that's where we're currently up to with this. Moving on, what they've also promised, as I explained before, is simplifying the business visitor routes. So what happens is if you're looking at bringing somebody in, so bringing a worker in from your Belgium office abroad, um, they may come into the UK and they can work provided it falls within one of these permitted activities. So they're allowed to come in and attend meetings and conferences, seminars and interviews, give a one-off or short series of talks and speeches provided they're not organised as a commercial event, will not profit for the organiser, not make a profit for the organiser, carry out site visits and inspections, deliver training or share knowledge, negotiate and sign deals and contracts, be briefed on the requirements of UK-based customer provided the work is undertaken outside of the UK. And then you have this further exception that's can be quite complicated, which is install, dismantle, repair, service, or advise on equipment, computer software, and hardware, overseas hardware. Sorry, I can't read the end. If A, the overseas company is the manufacturer or supplier, or B, the oversized company is a part of the contractual arrangement for after-sales service agreed at the time of the sale or lease, including a warranty or other service contracts incidental to the sale or lease. Really quite long-winded and messy. But what that would entail is that if you're looking at having part of your international group come to the UK to do a project, or you are part of an international coming to the UK to do the contract, it's looking at those circumstances if you want to make use of this route to ensure that it falls within this situation. So we have a client looking at this area now to see whether the project would fit within it, but it's trying to make sure that if we'd had a bit more time, we could have potentially, because they do provide some of this, and probably could have easily fallen within this exception if the contract hadn't been agreed before taking the advice. So I think it's a bit of future planning. You're then looking at the other routes above, which make it very, very limited. So you can't come in, for example, um, and attend a meeting in order to deliver the work for the first 2-3 weeks, and then go back to back to the Belgium, wherever you've come from, in order to do the work. You're very restricted on what they can and can't do, and I think most people aren't aware of these restrictions. Um, at the moment, there isn't. You're only going to get caught on the border, essentially, and what we say to people who are coming in is to have a note and explanation as to why they're coming in if there's any questions raised. But I think most people moving in from Europe don't get stopped, don't have any inquiries as to why they're coming into the country. And at the moment, there's nothing sort of being fed back. This is changing, and I'll explain in a minute. They're bringing what's known as the ETA requirements, which means they're going to track why people are coming into the UK, um, which will essentially may have knock-on effects. I'll let you explain a bit later. The duration somebody's able to come into under a visitor visa is 6 months or less, um, unless they fall or less their role falls within the list of the visa national list. I can never remember the name of the list, which is why I have to check. The visa national list is a number of countries that if you need to come into the UK, you have to apply for a visa. Okay, you can't just arrive, be permitted entrance, and be given entrance without actually applying for a proper visa. So those are China. There's a long list. There's a lot of countries on the list, but those main ones are sort of China, Egypt, India, Pakistan, Nigeria, Tunisia, Ghana, and Thailand. And some of those you would have thought um, you thought you'd be able to enter the UK without actually making a written application, but you do require to do a visitor visa application. Visitor visa applications look pretty straightforward when you do the application process, but they're probably the most difficult ones to be successful on. About 25% of them fail. And the reason 25% of them fail is you need to be able to prove that you will leave the country. So you're proving a negative. So you have to prove ties to the country which you're coming from. So that can be proof of job, um, ownership of a house, family members over there, but you've got to prove that. So you need to produce documentation to it. You've also got to get the financial requirements right as well to prove you can afford the visit and you won't rely on public resources or won't on arrival. So there is quite a lot to do. Last one we did was about 55 supporting documents because that was particularly complicated. So I think what I'm trying to do here is, apologies, I'm not trying to make it overly complicated. I'm probably failing miserably at that, but is saying, look, first, when you're looking at these sort of things, is the person coming in, could they fall within the permitted activity route? Okay, if they Okay, or are they coming in from uh, a visa national, a country on the visa national list where we need to do a written visa in order to come in as a visitor? Okay, so do I need to make an application as a visitor or not? If I don't, then there's a work I'm going to be undertaking for within the permitted activities route. If it doesn't on either of those, because as part of the app, then you need another visa. So that would be a skilled worker or global mobility route. So then you're looking at those circumstances. If the skilled worker route, you don't have the English language requirements, don't the standards, then you need to be looking at some other route, and then it gets a bit more tricky to see whether it's going to be possible. The problem with the global mobility routes is they tend to be a higher qualification. So you're looking at more of a degree level qualification, which is means it can be more difficult. Which is why making the construction worker that we were talking about before is really difficult because they've got vocational skills, although it's a very skilled role that makes it difficult to come into global mobility. So all of this requires proper planning beforehand and looking at it. Well, they're hoping that what will happen is they're going to expand the range of roles. So they're going to make it easier rather than having that really complicated assessment that I've just sort of gone through probably quite badly. Flip that to my notes. So they're trying to make it it's easier and more attractive to do business in the UK. They're looking at simplifying those rules that have previously gone down. When you're actually speaking with companies coming in from Spain or Holland, the reaction is really negative as to the complexity of being able to bring people in even for a few days to work. Um, the hope they're hoping that this will be implemented in the autumn, this autumn, but there's nothing that's been planned or no guidance. I was hoping that we'd get a bit of an idea as to what they're going to do. The hope is that they're going to permit companies from international groups to come in and work freely for a period of 6 months, and to facilitate contracts within the UK and trying to expand business within the UK, which I think will assist hugely. But we've got very limited guidance as to what that's going to look like. But for the moment, sort of watch that space, and I'm happy to do something nearer the time when we get clarification on this, because I think it's going to be really, really important. What then this is going to fit in with is some other updates that are coming in. So I mentioned before about ETAs, so that's Electronic Travel Authorization Scheme. So I don't know if people have gone into the States before. When you enter the States, it's a long time ago for me, but you have to produce had to fill out a piece of paper explaining the reason for your visits and certain information. This is essentially what's going to come into the UK. So when entering the UK, people are going to be asked to have prior approval to enter the UK. So essentially, they will have to explain what the reason for their visit is. So in one sense, they're going to simplify the business visitor visa routes, so the permitted activities routes. But on the other hand, they're going to make more red tape by requiring people to do an ETA. I think one thing to be just alert to on this is if people are going to be entering and doing an ETA, they need to make sure that you're permitted to come into the UK under the right terms. Otherwise, what I think you'll find people happening is people being entering the UK. If people enter the UK incorrectly, and it might have a knock-on effect on the sponsorship license, because when you do your sponsorship license, you sign a declaration to say that you've permitted with or UK employment law, and if that's not the case, then obviously it may be a red flag. So I think it's understanding which these visa routes is going to be really important, and I think unfortunately probably going to have to do this again once we've got clarification on it. But I think it's just useful to know if you're part of an international group to mention to them that this requirement is coming in, and if you need any help or advice on it, then just let me know. But it's understanding that the reason for your visit does fall within the right entrance requirements, and then making sure that it's you're not falling between the cracks, because as I said before, I think a lot of people aren't aware of the permitted activities and how restricted it is. And I've heard all sorts of people coming in to do work without knowing those permitted activities, which can have knock-on effect. Also, what we said, I won't touch on this very long, is the innovator founder route. So that previously was a route for individuals seeking to establish businesses in the UK. They had to come with a significant contribution now, which required them to have a minimum of 50k to invest into the business that they were planning to develop. But that route has now closed as of the 13th of April and been replaced. It no longer requires the 50k minimum funding. Basically they've relaunched it to the innovator founder route. And it previously had a restriction as well on the innovator's ability to work for other businesses. You couldn't go off and work for another company. You could only work for the company you were planning to develop. So they've removed that requirement and made it far more sort of applicable to have a wider appeal to a lot more businesses, because there's very limited people taking up that route. What also we've seen is an increase in salary thresholds that is all detailed below. So just to be alert to that, if you're doing any visa applications, just making sure you're doing it on the updated figures. What they've also done is, instead of it being based on 39 hours, it's going to be based on 37.5 hours. So you must ensure they're paid that for 37.5 hours. So again, being alert to that, because one of the ways the reason for that being in place is it's to stop people offering the salary of, say, 26,200, requiring them to work 60 hours in order to make them get them essentially make the most of the situation. So therefore there is a limit on hours to ensure that they're paid at a minimum threshold. One thing we haven't covered off in the slides that I also want to touch upon is there's definitely an increase around trade deals. So obviously on the back of us leaving Brexit, there's been a lot of talk around the Indian trade deal and the Australian trade deal. There's also some arrangements that are in place with the US. And those areas are also dealing with immigration and migration issues of the workers. So I've been digging, we've obviously signed the Australia and New Zealand trade agreement. I've been digging around some of the website and things and trying to find more information around what actually is this going to mean. There's a lot of talk around the ability for workers to move from the UK to Australia, particularly of a younger age, and make it easier for them to have what's known as a working holiday maker visa. And then there's also talk between the age of 21 to 45, so graduate work exchange. There's not much about what the rules are going to be from people moving from Australia and New Zealand to the UK, but it is supposed to be relaxed and facilitate movement across borders. So I think one area to look out for is essentially other visa routes coming in from either from Australia, New Zealand, and India when the Indian trade agreement gets signed, to try and deal with those worker shortages. We've dealt with a lot of applications and people coming in from India. So I would hope that, again, this will simplify it and maybe reduce some of the costs that are in there. So to make it more appealing to bring workers in from abroad, and hopefully reduce some of that cost to enable you to take advantage of it. So there's all sorts of things developing in this space. I think it's possibly being alert to it, having an understanding of some of the compliance stuff, some of the rights and some of the opportunities that are there. What we also see is once people have the license in place, that they see people being contacted them to say, look, I've seen you have a license, could I come and work for you, and approaching companies on that basis. So it does have its advantages from that perspective as well. That's it for now, and I do promise that I will definitely do another one when we have a little bit more information, particularly around the permitted activities route. But does anybody have any questions? Anything they want to ask? It's quite hard on this to understand if people are getting a general feel for it or need clarification on anything. If nobody has any questions, or anything they want to raise, or even if they have any questions related to skilled worker applications or anything like that, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, I'll let you all get on with the day. Great. Right, well, thanks everybody for coming. If you've got any questions that you don't want to put on the group, or you want to email me and ask, or give me a call, I'm more than happy to discuss anything at any time. But hopefully that made sense, and hopefully be able to get back to you soon with a bit more clarification on this. Take care. Bye.